The sky over Varela Colony was dark and cold. Rain fell like silver needles on the shining streets. The dining hall was full of light, warmth, and laughter. Inside, alien nobles sat in perfect rows, enjoying their meals, but outside, on the wet stone steps, sat a little girl with purple eyes and silver skin. She held a cracked metal bowl filled with cold leftovers. Her clothes were old and patched, and her thin arms shook from the cold. Her name was Raya. She was only 10, and she was never allowed to eat inside. Raya was born from two worlds. Her mother was a proud Zarelian, noble and highborn. Her father was a Varnak, a warrior of a lesser race to many in the colony that made Raya unclean. They called her names half-blood, impure. Filth, they told her she could live in the colony, but not with them. She could eat, but never at the same table. She could study, but never speak in class. She could walk the streets, but not be seen. So Raya learned how to disappear. She ate outside, no matter the season. She spoke only when needed, and she never asked for anything. She told herself it was okay. She told herself this was normal. But deep down, Raya wished just once to be seen as someone, not something. That day, as the rain poured harder, a man walked by. He was tall, with light brown skin, black hair, and green eyes. His uniform marked him as a Terran peacekeeper, a human soldier. His name was Darren Hale. He was newly posted to Varela Colony, and this was his first week on patrol. He stopped when he saw the small girl sitting in the rain. His eyes moved from her wet clothes to her shaking hands. He looked back at the warm hall filled with people. Then again at the girl outside, alone. Something didn't feel right. "Hey," he said gently, "you okay out here?" Raya looked up, surprised. No one ever spoke to her like that. "I'm fine," she whispered. "I always eat here." Darren frowned. "Why? Why not eat inside like everyone else?" She looked away, her eyes full of something he couldn't name. "They don't want me there," she said quietly. That night, Darren sat in his quarters. Thinking about the girl, he asked another soldier about her. They told him she's a half-blood, Zarelian and Varnak. She's not allowed to sit with the nobles. She's lucky they even let her stay here. Darren couldn't believe what he was hearing. It was just a child. Why was everyone okay with this? He tried to forget it, but he couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her wet clothes, her small bowl, her sad face. The next day, Darren made a decision. He went to the mess hall early and took 2 trays of hot food, one for himself, and one for her when he walked to the steps where she always sat. The rain had stopped, but Raya was there, waiting with her empty bowl. Darren sat beside her, handed her the tray, and smiled. "For you," he said. Raya froze. "Is this a trick?" she asked. "No trick," Darren said. "You shouldn't eat alone." She stared at the tray. Then at him, slowly. She picked up a spoon. Tears welled in her eyes. But she didn't cry. She just ate. Silently, carefully, gratefully, inside the hall, people watched through the glass. Their smiles faded. Their voices stopped. One of them hissed, "A human eating with her." Another muttered, "He will ruin the order." But Darren didn't care. And Raya had never felt more human in her life. As the sun broke through the clouds, it cast light on the stone steps. 2 figures sat there, eating side by side, a soldier and a half-blood child. One act of kindness had started something. Something the whole colony would soon feel, because sometimes it only takes one person, one step, one meal, one moment to break 1,000 years of silence. The next day. The dining hall was louder than usual. The nobles of Varela Colony spoke in low whispers, stealing glances at the door. Everyone had seen the human soldier sit with the half-blood girl outside. It was a simple act, but to them, it was dangerous. Darren had broken something sacred. He had broken silence. Now they waited, wondering if he would do it again. Okay. And he did. Darren walked into the hall wearing his full uniform, his boots wet. With morning mist, he held a tray of fresh food in each hand. He looked around, saw the empty seat outside through the glass, and didn't stop. He passed the rows of tables, walked straight to the doors, and stepped outside. Again, Rhea was sitting in the same spot, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked up, shocked to see him again. "You came back?" she whispered. "Of course I did," Darren said with a smile. "I told you, you don't have to eat alone." He handed her the tray and sat beside her, his back against the cold stone wall. They ate quietly, the same way they had the day before. But something was different now. Inside the dining hall, no one was eating. They were watching. Eyes wide, mouths tight, one elder slammed his cup down. "This is disrespect," he growled. "A human should know better." Another voice replied, "He is only a peacekeeper, not one of us. But what if others follow? What if the children see this?" The leaders looked at each other, worried. Tradition was everything here, and Darren had stepped on it like dirt. Back outside, Darren turned to Rhea. "So," he asked, "what's your favorite food?" Rhea blinked, confused. "No one's ever asked me that." She said slowly. He chuckled. "Well, it's important. I need to know what to bring tomorrow." She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Warm bread," she said. "With honey?" Darren nodded. "Done." That smile stayed on her face all day. For the first time in her life, someone saw her, not her blood. Not her skin, not her shame, but her. Just a girl. Later that evening, the high table held a private meeting. It was made up of the oldest and purest bloodlines of the colony. The head noble, Lady Varin, spoke with a cold voice. "The human soldier is disrupting our culture," she said. "He must be warned." Another elder agreed, or removed, someone added quietly. They voted in silence. Their eyes full of fear, not anger, because deep down they all knew the truth if kindness spread, their walls would fall. The next morning, Darren received a message. He was summoned to speak with the high table when he entered the hall. He saw their sharp eyes, long robes, and perfect posture. They didn't rise when he arrived. They simply stared. "You are new here." Lady Varin began. "So we understand your ignorance." Darren stayed silent. "But what you did twice now goes against the customs of our people." He nodded slowly. "I see. And yet," she added, "you did it anyway." He took a deep breath. "Yes, I did," he said. They raised their brows, surprised by his honesty. "I'm here to keep peace," Darren continued. "But peace doesn't mean silence, and it doesn't mean cruelty. She's a child," he said. "Not a threat." Lady Varin's voice turned cold. "She is a reminder of failure," she said, "of bloodlines we tried to forget. And whose failure is that?" Darren asked quietly. Silence filled the room. They dismissed him with a warning. "If you continue, there will be consequences." Darren left without answering. He had already made his choice. Outside, Rhea waited for him again. He handed her warm bread wrapped in cloth and sat down. "You okay?" she asked, seeing the tired look in his eyes. He nodded slowly. "Yeah." Then, without thinking, he took a bite of her bread too. They shared it, one piece each, like old friends, inside the dining hall. No one could eat. They only watched. One act of kindness had become two. Two had become a symbol. And now, its fire of change had been lit. But fire, once started, does not wait. It burns, and it spreads. The colony of Virella was no longer calm. Something had changed, and everyone felt it. The nobles walked faster now, heads high but eyes nervous. Guards stood stiffer at their posts. Children whispered when they saw the human soldier and the half-blood. Girls sitting together each day, some whispered with curiosity, others with disgust, but they all whispered. What had started as a silent act had now become a loud symbol. Darren Hale, the Terran soldier, had become a name people spoke in every corner of the city, and Rhea, once invisible, was now impossible to ignore in the market square. An alien merchant leaned in close to his neighbor and said, "He eats with her every day, like she is one of us. Maybe the humans are trying to change us." The neighbor replied, "They should stay out of our ways." Others nodded, but no one spoke too loudly. Not yet. In the schoolyard, the children began asking questions. "Why can't Rhea play with us?" One asked. "She's dirty blood." Another answered, just like he'd been taught. "But she doesn't look dirty," the first child said, confused. The teacher quickly clapped her hands. "Enough," she warned. "Play quietly." But the questions didn't stop. Not in the schools, not in the homes, not in the high courts. Because kindness had planted a seed. And now it was growing. One night, Darren returned to his quarters and stopped cold at the door. The walls were covered in red paint, thick and angry. One word was written again and again. Traitor. His bed had been flipped, his table broken, and food thrown across the floor. But it wasn't the mess that made him pause. It was the small doll he had carved for Rhea, now ripped in two and left at the center of the room. He didn't report it. He didn't ask for help. He cleaned up quietly and placed the broken doll pieces in a small box. The next day, he still met Rhea. Still brought food, still smiled. But Ryan noticed the tiredness in his eyes. "Someone was mean to you?" she said softly. He nodded. "Yes, because of me." She asked. "No," Darren said, looking straight at her. "Because of fear." That same afternoon, a meeting was held by the high table again. This time, the room was filled with more voices, louder ones. "He's causing unrest," said one noble. "Our children are asking dangerous questions," said another. "A single Terran cannot decide our customs," said a third. But no one could agree on what to do. Punishing a human peacekeeper could spark conflict with Earth, and Earth still held power. They decided on a quieter plan. They would isolate Darren, cut off his supplies, send quiet warnings if he didn't leave. Worse would follow the next morning. Darren went to the mess hall, but his food card was rejected. He tried to file a maintenance request for his broken door denied. He greeted some guards he knew, but they looked away. He had become a shadow. But still, he smiled for Rhea. Still, he sat beside her each day. Still, he brought what little food he had, even if it meant he went hungry. Then someone left a note under his door, a single sentence written in perfect Zarelian script. "Stop, or she disappears." Darren stared at the note for a long time, his hands clenched slowly, then released. He folded the paper and placed it in the same box as the broken doll that night. He went to a secret communication point and recorded a message for Earth Command. He explained everything: how the colony treated the half-blood girl, how traditions were used to punish, how one act of kindness had become a war of silence. He ended with one request: watch closely. Meanwhile, Rhea began drawing again. Her pictures were different now, no longer sad or lonely. One showed a soldier standing between her and a crowd. Another showed a table with many chairs and everyone sitting together, but one picture she hid carefully under her mattress. It showed her and Darren both smiling, standing in the rain where they had first shared a meal. The whispers were no longer just whispers. They had become threats, but Darren had not stepped back. And Rhea had stopped looking down when she walked. The colony had a choice to make: to keep the silence or break it, to protect the old walls or open new doors. And all because one man chose to sit beside a little girl in the rain. One morning, Rhea did not come. Darren waited on the stone steps with 2 trays of food. Just like always, The sun was out, the air warm, but the seat beside him stayed empty. He waited for half an hour, then an hour more. But there was no sign of her. He asked the guards nearby, "Have you seen the girl who eats here?" They looked away and said nothing. He asked a passing worker, "She's probably been moved." The worker said coldly, "It was only a matter of time." Moved? Darren thought. But where? He searched the outer sectors of the colony. He asked shopkeepers, medics, janitors, anyone who might know. Most gave no answer. Some gave him cold stares. And a few whispered things he didn't understand, words in the old tongue. Heavy with fear and warning, at last, a young boy tugged at his coat. "You're looking for the half-blood girl." The boy whispered. Darren nodded. They took her. Out beyond the ridge, where the cast-offs live. Then the boy ran, afraid he'd be seen. Darren left his patrol path and walked straight to the colony's edge. Past the electric gates, past the guard towers, and into the dust. The air was dry. The ground cracked, and the buildings here were broken shells of stone and metal. This was the exile zone, the place for those considered too poor, too mixed, or too different. He found a small cluster of huts near a dying tree. In the last hut, he saw her. Rhea sat on the floor, arms around her knees, locked behind a thin energy gate. Her face was dirty, her clothes torn, but her eyes lit up the moment. "She saw him, Darren," she cried, standing quickly. He stepped forward and touched the gate. "Who did this to you?" he asked, voice sharp and low. "I don't know," she said. "They took me last night while I was asleep." Darren looked at the device holding the gate shut. It wasn't military grade, just colony security level 2. He pulled out his tool set and worked quickly. In less than a minute, the gate dropped. Rhea ran into his arms and held on tight. "You're safe now," he said. But he knew that wasn't true, not yet. He carried her back toward the main colony walls. People in the exile camp watched in silence, some with fear, some with hope. One old woman gave a slow nod as they passed. Darren didn't stop. Not even when 2 guards blocked the gate. "You're not authorized to bring her in," one said. Hand resting on his weapon, "She's been exiled," the other added. Darren stepped closer, his voice steady but full of steel. "She's a child, not a criminal. She broke no law. She belongs where she can eat, learn, live." "You break protocol, human," the guard growled. "I follow the only law that matters," Darren said. "Humanity." A small crowd had started to form behind the gates. People whispered again, but louder this time. Some watched with curiosity, others with anger, but a few nodded. The guards hesitated. Unsure, Darren walked forward, forcing them to move aside. He carried Rhea through the gates, back into the colony. No one stopped him now. They only stared. That night, Darren locked his quarters and placed Rhea in the bed. He sat in a chair nearby, staying awake to watch over her outside. Someone threw a stone at the window. It cracked the glass, but not his resolve. Rhea looked at him with tired eyes. "I don't want to go back there," she whispered. "You won't?" he said. "Not ever. But what if they come again? Then I'll stand in their way." She reached under the blanket and pulled out a crumpled drawing. It showed a tall man holding a child's hand, standing before a wall with cracks. The cracks glowed with light. "What's this?" Darren asked. "It's us," she said softly, breaking the wall. He held the drawing like it was treasure, because it was. The next day, the colony council called an emergency meeting. They were furious, not just because Rhea was brought back, but because people were watching, and now some were agreeing with the human. It had started with food, then it became a seat, then a rescue. And now it was a movement. They had tried to remove her, to erase her from sight, but in doing so, they made her more visible than ever. And Darren had shown that one man's courage could carry more weight than 1,000 years of rules. The next morning, Darren stepped into the central market holding Rhea's hand. Whispers followed them again, but they were different now. Not just fear, not just anger. Some were curious, some respectful. The human who broke the rules was still walking freely, and the girl they called unclean was smiling in public. Darren bought bread and fruit from a vendor. The vendor looked uncomfortable, but accepted the coins. Raya looked up and asked, "Why are they quiet today?" "Because they don't know what to do anymore," Darren said. "You're not invisible now." At the far end of the market, a group of students walked by. One of them looked at Raya and paused. It was a girl named Vela Pureblood Zarelian. Known for her proud family name, she looked at Raya, then at Darren, and slowly gave a small nod. Raya blinked in surprise, but nodded back. Darren smiled. A tiny crack had formed in the wall of silence. Later that day, Darren met with Captain Rourke, his commanding officer from Earth. The message he had sent earlier had finally reached them. The captain looked serious, his eyes sharp behind a dusty visor. "You've made a lot of noise, Hale," he said. "Yes, sir," Darren replied. "And the colony leaders aren't happy." "No, sir. But command has seen the reports," Rourke said slowly, "and they don't like what's been happening here." Darren stood still. So Rourke continued, "We're watching now." Darren exhaled softly. It wasn't a full order of protection, but it was something. Enough to make the council hesitate. Back at his quarters, Raya had drawn anew. Picture this one showed people of different colors and shapes, all sitting at one big table. In the middle were two figures, her and Darren, passing bread to others. He placed the drawing on the wall right above his bed. As the days passed, Raya began to walk with more confidence. She asked questions, told jokes, and even played with a few curious kids. But not everyone was pleased. A few nobles sent quiet warnings to Darren's communication terminal. "Step back before the balance breaks." One message read, another said, "When she falls, you fall too." He deleted the messages, but he never told Raya about them. He didn't want her smile to vanish again. One evening, Darren and Raya went to the Learning Dome. It was the first time she had entered it since being removed from class. Inside, students looked up in shock as she stepped in. The teacher hesitated, but said nothing. Darren led her to a corner and handed her a learning pad. She sat quietly and began reading. 10 minutes passed, then 20, and soon everyone had returned to their studies. When class ended, one student walked up to her, a boy named Liner. "Half Kari, half human. My father says what they did to you was wrong," he said. Raya looked at him, unsure what to say. "So," he added, "you can sit next to me tomorrow." Raya smiled slowly. "I'd like that," she said. That night, Darren found a package outside his door. It wasn't a threat this time. Inside was a fresh loaf of honey bread and a simple note, "For the girl who never ate alone again." He showed it to Raya, who laughed and hugged him tight. "You changed everything," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "We did," but deep within the council's chamber, Lady Varen sat in silence. Her eyes were closed, her hands folded tightly. One of her aides entered and said, "The people are watching the human more than us now." She opened her eyes slowly. "Then it's time we remind them who rules this colony," she said. "What do you mean?" an aide asked. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we begin the trial, far away from their secrets." Darren and Raya looked up at the stars. "Do you ever miss Earth?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said, "but I think I was meant to be here." "Why?" "Because someone here needed me." She leaned against him quietly. "And I needed you." The colony had changed, but it wasn't safe yet. Old powers don't fall without a fight, and tomorrow they would try one last time to silence the voices that had finally begun to speak. But the human and the half-blood were not alone anymore. The morning of the trial was bright and clear. The great hall at the colony center was filled with nervous whispers and tense silence. Every seat was taken. Aliens from every sector had come some out of anger. others out of curiosity, and many out of quiet hope. They waited, eyes fixed. On the large doors at the far end, at the front, sat the colony leaders, the high table. Lady Varin sat in the center, her eyes cold and steady. The hall fell silent as Darren walked in. Holding Rhea's hand, guards stood on each side of them, escorting them forward like prisoners. Rhea squeezed Darren's hand tighter, her small fingers shaking. "It'll be okay," he whispered softly. She nodded bravely. Lady Varon stood slowly, her voice clear and loud. "Darren Hale, human peacekeeper," she began, "you stand. Here accused of disrupting the peace and disrespecting our laws," she paused, her eyes landing sharply on Rhea. "And for bringing shame into this community." Darren stood straight, meeting her eyes without fear. "I've only shown kindness to someone who deserved it," he replied firmly. Lady Varin's mouth tightened slightly. "You call it kindness," she said slowly, "but your actions have created chaos. Children question our traditions," she continued. "Families argue over your actions, and some even defy our laws. Then maybe it's time those laws changed." Darren said calmly. A few quiet gasps filled the hall. Lady Varin's eyes narrowed. "You have no right to decide that," she snapped. "This colony belongs to us, not Earth. It doesn't belong only to you," Darren answered. Voice gentle but strong. "It belongs to everyone who lives here." Including her, he looked down at Rhea, who stood very still, her eyes wide. But determined, Lady Varin turned sharply to the crowd. "And you support this?" she demanded, her voice rising. "You allow a human soldier to challenge our ways?" Silence filled the hall, heavy and thick. Then, slowly, one older man stood. He was Zarelian, his robes worn but clean. "I remember being young," he said quietly, "when my best friend was taken away just because her blood was mixed." Eyes turned toward him. "It was cruel then," he said softly, "and it's cruel now." Lady Varin's eyes flashed. "Sit down," she ordered, but the old man stayed standing. Then another rose, a woman from the market. "My granddaughter asked me why we never let Rhea eat inside," she said, her voice shaking, and I had no answer. More voices rose from the crowd, each one sharing small truths. "I hid my heritage to avoid shame. I turned away friends out of fear. I regret following those rules." Lady Varin's voice shook slightly as she raised a hand to silence them. "This is not about your past," she warned. "It's about the future of our colony." Darren spoke again, calm but powerful. "And what kind of future do you want?" he asked. "One built on shame or one built on kindness?" He turned, facing the crowd directly. "Change is never easy," he said, "but sometimes it's necessary." The hall filled with quiet murmurs of agreement. Rhea took a slow breath, stepping forward beside Darren. "My whole life," she said softly, her voice trembling but clear, "I was told I was dirty, that I had to hide." She looked directly at Lady Varin. "But Darren showed me I didn't have to." She continued, "And now others see it too." A powerful silence filled the hall. Lady Varin realized her mistake too late. She had given Rhea a voice, one everyone could hear clearly now. Darren stood proud, his hand gently resting on Rhea's shoulder. Lady Varin looked around the room, seeing faces filled with doubt, hope, and courage. She took a deep breath, knowing her battle was lost, but she spoke once more, her voice cold and hard. "Very well," she said quietly. "If kindness is your choice, live with what follows." She turned sharply and left. The hall, cheers erupted suddenly. Darren knelt beside Rhea, who looked up, amazed. "You did it," he whispered. "No," she said softly, smiling through tears. "We did it." The trial had ended, but something new had begun. A wall had fallen. The shame that once kept the colony quiet had lost its power. Outside, people talked freely. Voices joyful and relieved. They spoke openly. Now not whispers, not threats, but clear, strong voices. Because one man and one child had dared to stand together. Yet, deep down, Darren knew it wasn't over. Tradition, pride, and fear were slow to fade. But for the first time, real hope had risen, and he knew they would never be alone again. Days after the trial, a strange calm filled Varela colony. Something powerful had changed, and everyone felt it. The streets were filled with quiet smiles and friendly nods. The whispers of fear had turned to words of kindness in the dining hall. The long tables where nobles once sat proudly separate were rearranged. Now, there was only one large table, a table for everyone. Humans, Xerelians, Varnock, half-bloods all sat together, side by side, and at the head of this new table were two simple chairs. They weren't grand, not decorated, not special in any way. But everyone knew who would sit there. Darren and Rhea entered quietly. At first, they paused at the doors, unsure what to expect, but then the hall erupted with applause. Rhea looked up at Darren, eyes wide, amazed. He squeezed her hand and whispered, "This is for you." She shook her head softly. "No, this is for us." They walked together to the head of the table. Faces smiled warmly as they passed. Some of these faces once turned away from Rhea by. Not today. Today, they smiled. They nodded, and a few reached out gently to touch her shoulder. Vela, the pureblood girl from school, waved from her seat. Liner, the half-Kari boy, saved a place beside him, and the old man from the trial, the one who'd bravely stood first, smiled gently and nodded with pride. As Darren and Rhea sat down, everyone quieted. Rhea took a deep breath, suddenly shy again. But Darren smiled gently. "You're safe," he whispered. "They're here for you." Lady Varan entered slowly. Walking quietly to the end of the table, she stood, hesitant and unsure. Everyone looked at her, wondering what she might say. "I was wrong," she said clearly, her voice steady but gentle. "I fought to keep things the same because I feared change." She paused, eyes softer than before. "But I see now sometimes. Change is exactly what we need." Lady Varan lifted a small loaf of bread, broke it, and handed it to the person next to her, a young half-blood man. He smiled gratefully, breaking it further and passing it down. Soon, bread traveled along the table, handed gently from one to another. Darren watched, proud but quiet. He had started all of this by simply sitting down beside a lonely child in the rain. Now, the colony had changed forever, and Rhea, who was once forced outside, now sat in a place of honor. After eating, Rhea stood slowly. Everyone turned, listening carefully. "I never thought I'd be here," she began softly. "Inside, with all of you." Her voice was gentle but strong. "Thank you for seeing me," she continued, her purple eyes bright, "for letting me be here." The hall was silent, respectful, moved. "But I'm not the only one who felt alone," Rhea said, looking around the table. "So let's make a promise. Let's never leave anyone outside again." Cheers filled the room. Claps echoed warmly against the walls. Someone shouted, "For Rhea?" Another voice quickly added, "And Darren." Laughter broke through, easy and free. Later, outside beneath the colony's evening sky, Darren and Rhea walked quietly along the streets. She held tightly to his hand. "Will things really stay this way?" Rhea asked softly. "Yes," Darren said confidently, "because now everyone sees clearly, even Lady Varan." Rhea asked with a small smile. Darren chuckled softly, "Especially Lady Varan." They stopped at the stone steps, the same spot where Rhea once sat alone, the place where Darren first broke the silence. Rhea looked at the step thoughtfully. "It feels different now," she whispered. "Good? Different?" Darren asked. "Very good." She smiled warmly. From that day, the colony began to heal. Old wounds closed. New friendships blossomed. Raya returned to school, learning openly beside new friends. And Darren stayed, watching the walls slowly come down. Raya's drawings now decorated the colony's hallways. Pictures of unity, kindness, and hope. Her favorite drawing of two figures standing in the rain, side by side, was placed in the council chamber itself, a gentle reminder of what one act could do. The new table in the dining hall remained, a symbol that Varela Colony had chosen to grow together. They learned the truth Darren had taught. Kindness isn't weakness. Kindness is strength. And Raya, the girl they'd made eat outside, became proof that courage could change everything. With a little help from one human who saw clearly, who refused to stay silent, together they had set a new table, and now everyone had a seat, forever.